it's going to take 10 to 15 years just to clear the rubble.
Hello, team, and welcome to Bureaucracy. I'm your host, Emily Gross, and I'm very excited today because I have Khaled Elgindy with me, and we are going to be talking all about this truce between Israel and Gaza and the 20-point peace plan and what the future may hold. So, Khaled, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Yeah. So, yes, a friend of the pod. Very happy to have you back. So this is another morning recording, so we're not drinking beer, but I have a cup of coffee that's bigger than my head, and it still doesn't feel like enough. So what are you drinking?
I'm drinking a tall, boring glass of water.
Good for you. Once again, we're pro hydration. We've had you on the pod, but just for people who haven't listened to that episode, question I always love to ask my guests is, why should we trust what you have to say?
Well, because I've been following this issue and working on it, working inside of it as a negotiator at one point also for many years. So I've been immersed in Israeli-Palestinian issues for 20, 25 years.
Wow. So very happy to have you. And you've worked a lot with the Palestinian Authority, right? And as a negotiator.
With the Palestinian leadership, yeah. Technically, it was the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization.
Got it. Okay, great. So it's been about a week of this truce, of the ceasefire. And what was so shocking to me was the fact that the initial was there, but then nothing else, which is like very happy to have this ceasefire. I think it's something absolutely to be celebrated. But it does feel like the celebrations are a little bit early. I'm personally nervous. I'm very nervous. What are your thoughts?
It was when we saw the real chance that the daily horrors that we've been witnessing for the last 2 years were going to end, it was hard to not feel like a sense of relief. And then when they did end, Gaza went, every day, almost every hour for 740 some odd days under constant bombardment and massive death and destruction. And so any respite from that is of course welcome. But yeah, it's there's also a lot of fear about what comes next. One, does this hold? Because we saw the last ceasefire deal in January, where we also breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Oh God, finally this horror show is going to end." And it lasted for a while until Benjamin Netanyahu decided, I'm done. I want to go back to bombing. And that all ended in March, and things got even worse. We saw mass starvation. Israel completely blocked everything for about 11 weeks, and nothing was entering into Gaza. No food, no medicine, nothing. And then that's when we started to see the onset of mass starvation and eventually even famine. So we've seen at least parts of this movie before. And so it's deeply worrying. Is this going to hold?
I want to talk about this 20-part peace plan because it has some very interesting, important, lofty goals, right? But like we just talked about, none of the actual details are ironed out. And we're already starting to see some push and pull, on Israeli and also on the Gazan side as well. What are your thoughts on this 20-part peace plan? What also really stuck out to me is the fact that Trump is a very, very prominent part of it consistently, just in the immediate and in the long term.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing that is most striking to me, at least in sort of broad political terms, is the very grandiose way that President Trump talks about the conflict and about this plan. He talks about a 3,000-year conflict that is finally coming to an end, and that this is a great moment for all of, in human history, really, really overselling both the plan and the conflict. The conflict is, yeah. This is not a 3,000-year old conflict. It is at best maybe 100 and 20, 130 years, maybe. But really, we're talking about the last 80 years that are of most significance in terms of Israeli-Palestinian dynamics. So, and the plan does not actually bring peace, right? This is not. There's no mention of the West Bank, for example. This is only about Gaza and its future, which parts of it are welcome, parts of it are going to be very tricky. This idea of a board of peace, for example, run by, headed by President Trump himself, and including people like Tony Blair, former, UK Prime Minister, who's not terribly popular in the Middle East, but especially with Palestinians. So we don't know how that's going to work. Beyond this first phase of, we saw hostages released. That was also a relief, certainly for those Israeli families. We saw Palestinian prisoners and hostages being released because there are thousands in Israeli jails of Palestinians who have never been tried, never been charged with any crime, but Israel can just scoop up people at will. And so, in addition to people who are serving, life sentences and then long terms, that was also a relief. But beyond that, we don't know what happens next. We don't know what demilitarization of Gaza looks like. Who's going to do that? We don't know what disarming Hamas will look like. These are much trickier points to negotiate, and by extension, also create opportunities for if people wanted to go back to war, there are plenty of opportunities to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, and listen, I am hopeful. I'm trying to be optimistic, right? But I do really feel like it's going to be one person accuses the other, and then it's just going to be back to the same old bombardment by Israeli forces. I'm hoping that's not the case, but, it feels like it's holding on by a thread at the moment.
Yeah. And that thread is called Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump is the difference between this ceasefire holding and it not holding. The moment he gets bored with it, the moment he loses interest or decides it's no longer useful for him, that's when we should feel worried, and that's when we're likely to see a return to the bombing.
I mean, we're already seeing moving on to Ukraine and Russia.
He solved 3,000 years of conflict, so why not?
He's solved 8 wars in 8 days?
I know. It's crazy.
I mean, he's still pissed off didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize, so he's
but
really
there's
trying
always next year. Yeah, for sure. And I think this is part of his auditioning for the Nobel Prize for next year.
Absolutely. I do want to address you calling some of the Palestinian, and I would also use the term hostages, but I had to have a really interesting introspective moment, with the 1,700, I believe, Palestinians who had been detained, right? And the media has been calling them prisoners. And there have been people who there was 250 that committed crimes and were tried. But there was also 1,700 that never committed a crime and were detained and kept in prisons for 2 years and face serious signs of malnutrition and torture and being beaten and terrible, terrible conditions. And I had to have a moment of being why am I so comfortable using the word hostages for the Israeli hostages that were, taken into Gaza? And why am I uncomfortable using the term hostages for those 1,700 Palestinians? And I had to have this moment, and it's so much conditioning, right? And I know I have a lot of, family and friends and a lot of Jewish, and I'm Jewish, right? And Jewish family and friends that would scoff at the idea of comparing and using the same terminology. But I've just asked people to really look and even just write down as a thought exercise, the difference between those that were detained in Israeli prisons and also the people that were hostages in Gaza that were Israeli citizens. And look, these similarities and the similar situations that occurred And I would argue that the same terminology should be used for both. And one should not be prisoners and one should be hostages. Both should be hostages.
Yeah, and that's why I use the term, because people will say, well, there is no moral equivalence. There absolutely is a moral equivalence, because I think the trap is to define events and actors in terms of the roles that they're cast in our brains, and that the sort of the narrative, right? The narrative is Hamas is a terrorist organization, therefore everything that they say and do is illegitimate, wrong, evil. Israel is a country with a government and a military. They operate under certain rules. They wear uniforms. They are part of this elite club of Western civilized nations, and therefore they don't do things that are wrong. And the problem comes when you judge events by the identity of the people acting rather than the actual activity, because for some people, Israel never does anything wrong, right? Everything that Israel does is somehow legitimate, can be explained away. But the reality is that Israel rules over millions of people who have no rights. They are not citizens of the country that rules over them. Israel there is no, so Israel's a democracy, but it's a democracy only for half of the people under its rule who happen to be Israeli citizens. But for the other half, for 5.5 million Palestinians in the occupied territories, they're under military rule. They're under martial law. So of course Israel can go in and arrest whomever it wants, whenever it wants, and it does so, and it uses them as bargaining chips. And that's exactly what the 1,700 Palestinians who were recently released were. They were bargaining chips, and there are many more. There is, for example, Hussam Abu Safiya, who is the physician who is head of the Kamal Adwan Hospital, one of the many hospitals in Gaza that were destroyed. He is still in detention, and nobody understands why. Why are you holding healthcare workers? He's a pediatrician. He was the chief of this particular hospital. It's so there are so many people like that, in addition to the actual political prisoners. People who have been accused of political violence, of carrying out attacks on Israelis. But that's what happens when you have a military occupation over people. And so either they're hostages or they're political prisoners, or in some cases both.
It's just an interesting, because I would encourage people to look into the fact that Israel can detain people without charging them with anything for like indefinite amounts of time.
Yeah. And Israel has a very long record of mistreating its prisoners, and that has actually gotten much worse under the head of the prison system is none other than Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Kahanist Jewish supremacist extremist who is the Minister of National Security, and he has boasted about how he has worsened the conditions. He's decreased the amount of food. He's increased the amount of time prisoners spend in solitary confinement. He's eliminated things like family visits, and even the recent flotilla activists who were captured in international waters and taken back to Israel and held in prison. Many of them, or I think most of them, report being beaten and mistreated and humiliated.
Especially the Jewish ones.
Especially the Jewish ones. Exactly. And so it's, this is, I think people forget, this is in a very, very extreme government that already has, Israel already has a history of many kinds of abuses against Palestinians. And all of those have gotten much, much worse.
I saw you were on, I think it was CNN, talking about the importance of making sure that Palestinians are at the table. How are you feeling about the likelihood of that? How are you Where do you think that's going to go?
I think it is entirely possible. It is doable even within the framework that Donald Trump has put forward, which doesn't really prioritize or center Palestinian agency. In fact, it kind of negates both of those. It's possible. I mean, but it requires two things. One, I think there has to be the powers that be, whether it's the United States or Israel, or the Arab states or whoever the various stakeholders, the actors on the ground are going to be. They have to be willing to allow Palestinian participation in this, and I think that will only happen when it's forced on them. So that's the other piece of this: is Palestinians also have to assert themselves and seize their own agency. Of course, there are many different Palestinian actors. There's the Palestinian Authority, there's Hamas, there are Palestinians on the ground, there's Palestinian civil society in different forms. And so there's obviously a multiplicity of actors. But what we don't have is a credible unitary Palestinian leadership. That needs to happen, I think, for Palestinians to be at the table. And that's a process that Palestinians can control. They can put their internal political house in order. They can try to speak with one voice politically, because at the end of the day, there is nobody who has the best interests of Palestinians at heart more than the Palestinians themselves, particularly those in Gaza. And in order to give voice to them, you need a political leadership that is credible and legitimate. And we just don't have that at this point.
Yeah. I do want to bring up the fact that we have seen Hamas kind of carrying out some public executions since the ceasefire. Originally Donald Trump was like, yeah, it's fine. And then he just immediately reversed course. And he was like, well, if they're killing people, then we're going to have to send someone in to kill them, which is all over the place and crazy. But it does appear that Hamas is trying to maintain control and is doing so in a pretty violent manner, which doesn't necessarily give way to hope for a democratic process. How do you make that happen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we need to be realistic about what is and isn't achievable in Gaza at the moment. Everything has been destroyed in Gaza. Everything. Hospitals, roads, water treatment plants, infrastructure of all kinds. There are no schools. There are no universities. Gaza is a gargantuan pile of rubble. And that's the kind of environment where chaos thrives, right? There's enormous collective trauma. There's enormous suffering. There are these ungoverned spaces. So I think what we're seeing is an attempt by Hamas to restore some modicum of order, and it's doing so in a pretty brutal way. There's no doubt about that. There are groups, there are gangs, criminal elements, and others who have worked with the Israelis to steal aid or to create chaos. And for people in Gaza, everything is now existential, right? Whether the borders are open, whether there's any kind of local security or governance, whether food is coming in, everything is existential. And that kind of a reality, I think, just creates a different dynamic. It's not about, people don't have the luxury to think about democratic governance. We're not at that stage. People are in survival mode. And I think, so part of it is asserting security. Part of it is settling scores with groups of bandits and others who are deemed as collaborators with the Israeli occupation, right? And these things happen, and this is the reality that has been created in Gaza. It's a very, very desperate reality. That's not to excuse the brutality of it, but I think it's also unrealistic to expect that there are going to be functioning courts that are going to try people, and they're going to be afforded basic due process. This is not where Gaza is at the moment. None of those institutions are functioning. So it is a bit of kind of revolutionary justice happening, and it's ugly.
Yeah. What I thought was interesting in the 20-part plan was also the kind of assumption that the Palestinian Authority would regain control of Gaza. And for people that aren't aware, the PA was voted out, what was it, 2007? And that was when Hamas came in power. And I know the PA is not necessarily favored by Palestinians. What do you take of the kind of push for the PA to become the main control over Gaza and of the West Bank? I mean, it still is the West Bank, but of Palestine.
Yeah, so just to clarify one point, because a lot of people have this misconception. Hamas was elected in 2006. They earned a majority in both Gaza and the West Bank. There were national elections. They didn't just win an election in Gaza. They won national elections. They were in a position to form a government on its own, but that was rejected by Israel, the United States, and most of the international community. And kind of that situation forced Palestinians into a civil war in 2007, in which Hamas carried out what it saw as a preemptive strike against the Palestinian Authority that was believed to be plotting to overthrow the elected Hamas government. So that's just in a nutshell. That was the last elections Palestinians had in 2006, so almost 20 years ago now. You're right that the Palestinian Authority is deeply unpopular in the West Bank. Most polls show that the overwhelming majority of Palestinians want President Mahmoud Abbas to resign. He's almost 90 years old.
Oh my God. I don't think I realized how old he was.
Yeah, he's quite old. And he has not been an effective leader. The two things that the Palestinian national movement historically prided itself on were unity, creating national unity, taking all of these disparate Palestinian factions and groups and putting them under a single umbrella called the PLO. That was the major achievement in the 1970s and 80s. And the PLO became a truly representative body. And the other thing that the PLO was best known for was the independence of decision making. And that is because they're not a state, because they're subject, Palestinians live under many different regimes in Jordan, in Israel under occupation, in the refugee camps in Lebanon, in the diaspora, some in the Gulf states. They're under the influence of all these other bigger powers, the Egyptians, the Iraqis, the Saudis, the Jordanians, all these people interfering in Palestinian affairs. And so those are the two things that the Palestinian national movement most jealously guarded: the independent decision-making and national unity. Both of those have been shattered under the rule of Mahmoud Abbas. He has allowed this Palestinian division. He didn't create the division between Hamas and Fatah. That had been building up for some time, but he allowed it to happen. The civil war happened on his watch, and he allowed it to fester for another generation since then. And of course, his weak leadership. He's not an independent actor asserting Palestinian agency. And so that's a lot of background to say that Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority are not well positioned at the moment to simply swoop into Gaza and take over. Gaza is going to have so many more problems than anything they've dealt with in the West Bank, and they've been out of Gaza now for almost 18 years or so, and so that will be difficult. So what needs to happen isn't the Palestinian Authority swooping in or Hamas resuming, picking up where it left off, on October 6th of 2023 and becoming the de facto authority there. But what needs to happen is a process of consensus building among Palestinians between Mahmoud Abbas and his Fatah party and Hamas and the other Palestinian political factions, but also Palestinian civil society, to sit down and sort of decide on a new consensus. Who are the technocrats who are going to be part of this committee that the plan talks about? It matters, I think, who they are, but what matters more is how they're selected. Is it Mahmoud Abbas handpicking people to head that committee? Is it the Israelis who are picking these Palestinians, or the Americans for that matter? Or is it, it's not going to be Hamas who selects them, but it needs to be a kind of pan-Palestinian discussion, and it needs to be a process of consensus. Every Palestinian actor has to have a stake and buy-in and give their consent to that next phase. I don't see that happening right now, but it's a process that I think needs to happen. And without it happening, it's not going to really enjoy much legitimacy.
How do they, like you said, Gaza's destroyed. It's complete rubble. It's what, 98, 90, like over 90%, all of it is destroyed. Who's cleaning up? How do you clean it up? What do you do?
It's hard even to wrap your brain around the level of destruction. I've heard estimates ranging from, it's going to take 10 to 15 years just to clear the rubble. And so where do you put people in the meantime? Where do you need housing? Winter's coming soon, and the winters in Gaza tend to be wet and cold. And people need shelter. In addition to, obviously, food and medicine. That's another piece of this. The basic things that people need: shelter, access to medical care. All of those things have to happen in the meantime before Gaza can be rebuilt, because we're talking about years, if not decades, of rebuilding. So how does Gaza sustain life for 2 million human beings in the meantime? That is a massive endeavor. I don't know if it's even possible. And I think the fear is that eventually people will just leave. Whoever has the resources to leave will go to wherever anyone will take them. Because you need schools, right? You need jobs, you need hospitals, and these things just don't exist anymore. And I think it's important to point out that is not by accident. This is not collateral damage. This was a deliberate plan to make Gaza uninhabitable, to destroy the means that sustain life in the Gaza Strip for 2 million people. And that is why the growing consensus of experts are calling this a genocide, because there's very clear intent to destroy the means of life. They bombed all the bakeries. They bombed what little agricultural land exists in Gaza. This is not collateral damage. This is by design. It's not conceivable nor mathematically possible to imagine that Hamas is located and storing weapons and launching attacks from every single hospital, from every single university, from every single apartment building. It's just beyond belief. How anyone could accept that sort of reasoning that all of this is, well, Israel tried to avoid harming civilians, but Hamas is everywhere.
Right. It's, read between the lines. I mean, how are people on the ground feeling?
Well, I mean, there was obviously euphoria in the immediate aftermath of the ceasefire announcement, and then as soon as the bombing stopped, there was a sense of relief. Palestinians were desperate. I think they're still desperate. They are worried that all of this is just going to restart again. That Netanyahu's calculations haven't changed. He needs this war to continue to remain in power. Otherwise, people start asking questions about his own corruption and his own failures on October 7th of 2023. I mean, this was a massive security and intelligence failure. There is no commission of inquiry looking into that. I think in any normal reality, right, that there would have been a commission of inquiry. And in fact, the prime minister, the leader at that time of such a colossal failure, would have had to resign in disgrace. But instead, he's managed to hold on. So I think everybody knows that he's sort of tenaciously holding on to power. Now, you asked about how Palestinians are feeling. That's one of the things that worries them is that, at any moment, all of this could come crashing down and we could be right back where we were. If this manages to hold on, to hold for several more weeks and months, then I think the focus is going to turn to, and it is already turning to, okay, how do we make this place livable again? How can we, as a population, survive and remain in our land and help rebuild our society? And that will take a lot of work from the outside, a lot of resources that Palestinians don't have that they're going to count on from the international community. But it will also take, I think, putting Palestinian heads together and making that happen.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's possible for Palestinians to thrive, or not even thrive, exist at the moment or work towards statehood with Netanyahu in power. I just don't think he'll let it happen. So I think there needs to be some serious reckoning on the Israeli side.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, if you look at set aside Gaza for the moment, look at the West Bank. The West Bank is in a horrible situation. It's the worst security situation the West Bank has ever experienced. The movement restrictions, destruction of whole refugee camps, displacement of 40 or 45,000 Palestinians have been completely forcibly displaced from various refugee camps in the northern part of the West Bank. There are mass arrests. There is settler terrorism almost daily. And so the conditions on the ground are horrendous, even where there isn't a genocide happening in the immediate environs, right? It's so, people are going to have to come to terms with just how extreme this government is. That, okay, yes, the bombing has stopped for now, but there are still horrible things happening in the West Bank and Jerusalem, and even in Gaza. People are still being killed, just not on the same level. So if that's going to change, there needs to be a change in Israel, and that's, we're still a year off from elections.
Right. Was there anything else you'd like to touch on?
No, I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, we covered a lot. So just hoping to whatever exists in the universe that things remain as calm as they can be at the moment.
Yeah. It's hard to be an optimist, but we can at least take a moment to breathe a sigh of relief.
Yes, absolutely. Multiple things can exist at once, is what I always like to say. Well, Khaled, it was great to have you again on the show. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I'm your host, Emily Gross. We'll be back next week with another episode of Bureaucracy.